All right. Hello there, you happily miserable accursed. We have a new guest panelist joining the always effervescent Scott Reid and I on Curse of Politics this week. It's a good friend of the show, Dennis Matthews. Dennis has guested with us numerous times on the Hurly Burly. In fact, now that I think about it, he might hold the all-time Hurly Burly guest appearance record for someone whose name isn't Jenny or Scott. Yet Dennis has been on a lot, doing a lot of advertising analysis and political analysis for us. He's a partner at Enterprise Canada and the president of its ad agency and content studio, Creative Currency. He was a key advertising advisor to Prime Minister Harper for a number of years, more recently one of the architects of Tim Houston's stunning victory in Nova Scotia, and he's just helped Doug get it done as a creator of that little majority-winning ditty. Only Doug can get it done, says Dennis Matthews. All right, today on The Curse, we're going to talk about, we're going to talk
boy stuff, obviously. It's all boys. It's like the Navy or a Martin Scorsese film. It's just giant sausage party today.
I was hoping that you would not point out that we have a mantle today.
We have a mantle.
Right? It's going to be, poorly received from that respect. So we're going to have to up our game content-wise to overcome that. So let me say that we're going to talk about how the Liberals are managing issues right now. Pearson Airport Emergencies Act, inflation, are they on their back foot? We're going to talk about the CPC leadership race, which continues to get more angry and hostile as it goes on, even as it reaches levels you couldn't imagine. We're going to talk about the fact that the BC Liberals don't want to be Liberals anymore. And we're going to have a clipping, and we're going to have a Hey You at the end of it with Gordon Pinson. So, wow, what a show. What a jam-packed show. Dennis, how was your weekend?
It was great, David. It's sunny. It's biking season and golfing season, and really, what more can you want? The election's over here in Ontario, at least.
Scott, were you out biking?
I was, yeah. I like to cycle. Well, I don't actually like to cycle, but I like to put on skin tight outfits. So I spent a lot of time doing that.
Well,
absolutely,
half of it.
Yeah,
you're halfway there.
I just enjoy any opportunity to shave my thighs, and so I'm with Dennis.
I'm asking about your weekend because we're recording the show a day early this week because tomorrow is my 60th birthday, and I don't anticipate being in any kind of emotional condition in which to do a show like this tomorrow. I'll be very vulnerable tomorrow. Hey, Dennis, let's
60.
talk about the Ontario 60. Fuck.
Let me say happy birthday first then. Let's start with the happy birthday, because there you go.
Happy 7th decade. You and Queen Elizabeth. Get a load of how old you are. I can't have... I told my mom that your 60th birthday was coming up. She's like, Jesus Christ. My mom, who's old, obviously, since she's older than me, she's like, Jesus Christ, now, she's like, this is depressing. You have 60-year-old friends. She's like, how old does that make me? I'm like, no kidding. It's all boneyard for us next.
That's not helping, Scott. I'm not really.
Sorry, but anyway, but it's going to be great. And I'm sure there'll be a cake.
Fuck. All right. Dennis, thank you for the happy birthday. Dennis, congratulations on the victory with Ford. Let's tell us a little bit about what role advertising played in that win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably the guy who will always tell you plays a big role, but it was, I think what really helped on the Ford campaign, I know you and Corey got into this in your longer form interview the other day, but the sort of positioning of Doug. I mean, there was the sort of the for the people. He was really closely tied to his brother, who was mayor of Toronto, and this was a stepping out for Doug on his own and sort of on his own terms and leveraging some of the leadership people sort of picked up on during COVID and trying to turn it into something that positioned him well against his opponents, sort of a leadership framing and this get it done. It wasn't just what are you getting it done or who you're getting it done for. It sort of spoke to who's capable of getting it done. And in these times we live in, people wanting to get things done. And you sort of put that mash together. And I think it was, a really helpful positioning for the campaign. And obviously it played out in advertising, but it played out on the bus. It played out in the song. It played out on backdrops. And it really came together.
Why the song? And I know I've made fun of the song. I said it should be rowed out to the middle of Lake Ontario and sank. So but I'm just being a dink on that. But honestly, I want to understand your thinking strategically. What does a song give you that other things wouldn't? Like, what's its relative and incremental value? How come you said, I'm going to spend money on getting a song done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the view in campaigns, especially now, that voters are so distracted. I mean, we saw this with the low voter turnout, right? I mean, obviously a lot of people aren't engaged. And when you've got a message, something that you really want to get across, finding a way to get it across in so many different ways, whether that's just a little bit of the jingle that they hear, whether it's a quick clip on social, whether it's your full-fledged TV ad, whatever it is, tying it all together, because I don't think anybody's sitting down and, eating popcorn, watching one thing you're doing. They're maybe picking up 50 or 60 things during the campaign. And if you can make those things either the same or on the same song sheet or on the same sort of approach, that's how you get it to sink in. And so it's not about the song for the sake of having a jingle or something at the rally. It's to help tie it all together. And that's where I think it plays a big role.
If I hired you to have a song composed for me, would my brand improve? Would people like me more? Is that something like, because I mean,
we can talk afterwards. Like that's an option for you.
Good. I should think. David, you're either on mute or because you're 60, your vocal cords have just gassed out.
They've just gassed out. I'm just done. Sorry, I'd muted so I could drink coffee. I'm noisy when I do that. But I was going to say, I think that this song is an example of how the Conservatives really have their finger on the pulse of what people really want. Because despite the fact that everybody says they hate Nickelback, Conservatives know that lots of people actually like Nickelback. And so they make their songs sound like Nickelback. And I hear them and I go, oh my God, that sounds like a Nickelback song. But lots of people obviously end up walking around singing Only Doug Can Get It Done. No, you have alluded to the fact that you had way more money than the other people. How did that manifest itself in terms of the advertising game?
Well, I think first, the type of campaign that can put together a song, this is not something that comes out quickly, right? This is a planned campaign, and you have to put some time and effort into that kind of process and have the money to do so. I really felt, and I guess we'll see this all when the whatever the results and stuff come out later through Elections Ontario, but it really feels like, the PC campaign, a bit of a juggernaut in compared to the other two. I mean, I'd sit and watch a hockey game, see 2 or 3 PC ads, nothing else. I'd be asking people, hey, have you heard a Liberal spot, and crickets, and, money plays a role in these kind of big mass market campaigns. There's a lot of talk about the sort of clever digital targeting and all that kind of stuff. And I think it helps you get versions of things. It allows you to have, the seniors ad for seniors. It allows you to have the family, the childcare ad for young families or whatever it is, or a hey, here's a highway we're going to build in your area. But these campaigns, they're an air war. And if you can, if you have more ammunition to drop, that makes a huge difference. And I think, you guys have unpacked the Liberal campaign a lot, but I think one of the stories on unpacking that is they just didn't have the resources to get their message out in a campaign where so few people were paying attention. And so money, sometimes people like, well, it doesn't matter how much money you have if you're clever and you can digitally target all that kind of stuff. You need the tonnage in a campaign. You really do.
Yeah. Just, can I ask him one more question? I'm sorry, David. I'm pretending to be the interviewer here, but can I ask one more question? I'm just super curious about.
Can I leave and get a coffee, Scott?
Absolutely. Or you know what? Why don't you go see if you can get 10 years somewhere? I know that's what you really are looking to purchase. Dennis, so just as picking, because to me, I'm fascinated by this notion of, digital ads where it's a slew of really highly targeted, maybe disconnected from your campaign theme. It's just like, I don't care. Maybe my theme is about change, but if 7% of people who I think might be inclined to vote for me are interested in childcare, I got to talk to them about childcare versus the big narrative ad that runs on Hockey Night in Canada or wherever. And so if you only had a little bit of money to spend as an expert in 2022, would you focus more on making sure that money was concentrated on digital ads that were trying to get your vote surfaced as much as possible? Or would you, or if that's the right premise, or would you say, nope, I got to do something that punches through. I want one big motherfucking ad that really grabs people by the throat and causes them to rethink what they think about this campaign? Or is that just that idea of a 1988 rubbing out the border ad, is that gone forever? Is that just no longer part of our reality?
Yeah, it's complicated, and I think it's no longer part of the reality in that, there's nobody sitting down watching one show. Like there's no Friends finale or the Seinfeld finale or MASH or whatever. Take the big sort of iconic, everybody was watching something, right? I mean, you sit down for a beer with somebody, they ask you what you're watching right now, and there's 20 different streaming options for things, and so you don't have the ability to do the splash in the same sort of targeted way you might have had even 10 years ago. But, to your sort of initial question, I mean, I think you've got to start on digital if you don't have a lot of money. That's where you're going to, try to get some quick wins in that space with the right demos and the right areas and build from there. But, these big winning campaigns, you have to really, it's like a furnace. You're just throwing your dollars in, but you have to do it as a way to reach people. They're so distracted. And on the digital side though, and somebody asked me after the campaign, they said, "Oh, you guys ran a big negative campaign and all that kind of stuff." And I sort of pushed back and said, go into the Facebook library, look at all the spots that were run, look on the TV, the fact that we're talking about the song, this was, obviously there were some hard hits on the
Corey
opponents.
said it was 70-30, 60-40 negative.
About that. Yeah, I'd say about that. Maybe on digital, actually, maybe a little positive, skewed a little more positive simply because, this notion of getting it done actually meant building certain things or doing certain things, which I think added to a lot of the regionality of it. But I think it was probably one of the more positive winning campaigns out there in a while.
Is that because you didn't have to? Is that because you just didn't?
For sure. I mean, that's obviously you're running, if you're falling behind or slipping away, I can tell you, the dial will move over, but you had
other cards in your hand that you didn't have to play.
Exactly.
Right. Herle Burleyites, welcome to Spectrum Squatting 101. Or the hoarding of and then not using wireless spectrum waves by some of our country's biggest regional carriers. I told you last week we were going to do a wee seminar on this. Instead of deploying, they just sit on it, leaving entire swaths of rural Canadians not connected to our high-speed digital world. Why? Because these regional billion-dollar companies would rather wait it out, hoping to resell it later for massive profit. It's called spectrum speculation. On behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, we've talked about all of this here before. What we haven't talked about is how government digital policy that allows for spectrum squatting is harming the fight against climate change and potentially keeping us from reaching our targets. Best practice digital policy is climate policy. That's the finding of the Farpoint report, an independent technology consultancy out of the UK. With more widespread digital adoption, that's high-speed connectivity across all of rural and urban Canada, we could all work more effectively from home. There'd be fewer cars and trucks on the road, shorter, more efficient routes for trains, planes, and cargo ships, and a reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions of between 120 to 190 megatons, 40 to 60% of our Paris targets. But every link in the chain has to be connected to achieve any of it. Spectrum squatting just breaks that chain. There is a remedy. TELUS believes that all this hoarded spectrum must be brought back to market so it can be used to deliver service. That for all Canadians to be connected faster, the government must apply a use it or lose it policy, ubiquitously to all carriers, national and regional, urban and rural. And an ongoing climate crisis combined with a new and critical spectrum auction that's about to happen means there's no time like the present. All right, you know what? On this show, Dennis, we have a segment called Clippings where we talk about a news clipping from the past week. We even have sound effects for it. And now, our clipping is from CBC News website, Christian Pass-Lang. This is, we're moving from your area of expertise, Dennis, into Scott's and mine, leaders who are one and done. Is Canada slipping into a one and done party leader pattern? When Ontario Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca said he would resign in the wake of last week's provincial election, he became the latest addition to a big group of Canadian party leaders to get only one kick at the electoral can. Conservative leaders Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole only got one shot. Liberal leaders Stéphane Dion, Michael Ignatieff were afforded just one opportunity each. Ian Rankin in Nova Scotia, Andrew Wilkinson in BC, each got only a single shot to win. Almost all of these leaders resigned, but it certainly appeared they were quitting amid internal party pressures to avoid the embarrassment of being ousted. Is cutthroat one-and-done leader model on the rise, is the question that the CBC asks. And why would that be? It certainly seems that leaders in the past at the federal level used to get more opportunities. Stanfield famously got 3 of them. And the NDP have always been an aberration on this point, more patient with their leaders, different expectations of what they're supposed to accomplish. But, Dennis, you went through this with Scheer and O'Toole very recently. Is it that we know you can tell after one election whether the person's going to be able to get this done or not? Or is it that parties are so divided over leadership questions that if you don't have the internal authority of a win, you simply can't hold it together for a second shot?
Yeah, what a great way to put it. I think it's more your latter point there, that the internal party pressures on a candidate to win are maybe more enormous than they are for the public, who might be a little more understanding. But these races have become so hard fought, so bitter. That's a trend, I think, in politics overall. And because of that, people aren't able to sort of rally together afterwards, and it just creates this really toxic situation. Now, the only thing I'll think about as you're naming all of these different candidates here, none of them were really able to advance the ball. It's not like somebody went from, hey, I had 20 seats and then I had 80. It wasn't enough, but I picked up a huge swath. So, I'd be interested to see what happens after a situation like that. But it really feels to me like we're in a one and done era. And if I was advising a leader, I'd say you go all in to win. Like, you have to win. There's no 2 election strategy anymore.
Right. Scott, what's your take?
I don't think that has to be the case, but I think it's overwhelmingly more likely to be the case. I think that, and I think there's a perverse. I think there's a curiosity about this. I think one of the reasons is that parties have moved to a one member, one vote basis. And so you'd think that a brokered convention where a party, has to make compromises and it feels more like it's, a negotiated leadership result, that might leave parties more divided. And certainly you've seen that occur in the past. But I think oddly enough, if you take a look at it, the one member, one vote era has corresponded with the impatience, less genteel, if you don't win, you're going to be shown the door era. And I think those two things have some correlation. And in particular, I think what it means is you get parties where one thing that happens is that parties are susceptible to major signups. So somebody comes in and they don't necessarily have a foundation. We've talked about this indirectly on the pod before, but somebody comes in, they overwhelm me, signed up all the dairy farmers. But those aren't people that, like a brokered convention, a delegated convention, where those are people who are, they stand in their ridings because they've been long serving members of the association or well known. It's suddenly like, oh, all the dairy farmers came in, or all the lifers came in, or whatever have you. And suddenly people ride that to a position of leverage in a leadership campaign and then squeak it out. And so I think the one member, one vote thing, while, people can say it's, it bolsters membership, it increases engagement, it's fundamentally more democratic, has all these advantages. I think in some ways also diminishes engagement. It also diminishes attachment. It diminishes the standing. Maybe that's clubbiness and that's not as good, but it diminishes some of that. And so you don't have like, oh, well, let's just keep running Arthur Meehan until he finally wins kind of attitude. It feels like it's a less patient age.
Well, just to pick up on your point about leadership selection, though, these leaders resign not because the public is demanding that they resign on election night. They resign because they know they're not going to survive their caucus.
That's right.
Right? It's pressure from the caucus. And the one member, one vote has completely neutered the role of the caucus member in the selection of the leader. In a delegated convention, they still had brokerage capacity. They still had a leadership role in how the leader was selected, and they could feel influential in that process. Now they're just bystanders. They don't have to feel bought into the result of that thing at all.
It's such a weird dynamic, right? Dennis, you can speak this better because it's so apparent in the Conservative caucus with the Reform Act. But it's party membership hires you, but every leader knows if they don't win, it'll be the caucus that fires them, or at least the threat of it. And it's like, do I really want to sign up for having a bunch of people stab me in the back, maybe in the front, And so, you get this dichotomy of, because, once you cast your vote for leader, then you're gone, right? You don't really have much of a relationship after that.
No, it's remarkable. Caucus can break it and has almost no responsibility in fixing it. And it's interesting when I think there was a lot of federal caucus members who wanted Aaron O'Toole gone, but I don't know that they're going to be ultimately happy with the direction that the party is headed here. And so it's sort of interesting to watch that unfold, and the outsized role of caucus in the leader's ecosystem, but it almost has nothing to do with electability or where the party goes in a general.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, listen, let's move on. Time marches. Let's move on. And listeners are impatient. Our listeners are busy people. Yeah. You got to make this tight. Got to make this tight. It feels to me, just kind of all of a sudden, it feels to me like the Trudeau government's on its heels. Controversies are swirling around the Emergencies Act and the Pearson Airport delays. Inflation is completely taking over the public mindset. I've seen some data recently that was just nothing else matters right now other than that. Am I right, Dennis? Have they lost control of the public agenda right now?
Yeah, they don't have control of the public agenda. I think they're very fortunate, though, that we are in this period of low engagement where, COVID is in, at least for now, the rearview mirror. People are starting to enjoy the summer and they are leaned out of politics in a huge way. Couldn't be a better time for the Trudeau government to be stumbling a bit. But yeah, they've really lost a little bit of the plot. And some of these issues come down to the Pearson Airport and others. I mean, the federal government doesn't really do a lot of things, right? Like for regular people. They're not a service-oriented government, and they've encountered some service-oriented issues, whether it was clearing out Ottawa, whether it's Pearson Airport, whether it's security lines. Heck, the passport that I drive by to get into work, there's a line every morning of people on the street, a block line to get a passport. They're stumbling on the service side of things, and it's going to sting, I think. It's just people are a little leaned out right now.
Scott, how'd they get in this position?
Well, I think there's distinctions between some of these. I agree in general. I think it feels like they don't have their arms around this stuff. And I think some of that matters and some of it matters less. Like, I think you're always going to have, like the Emergencies Act, you're going to have a debate in Parliament. There's a lot of partisanship going on there. And people are like, oh, well, how come they got invoked? So like, I have my own criticism of how the government handled that. I don't think they framed it correctly from the outset. I think they allowed themselves to turn it into some kind of prosecutorial process where, like, people are going over the fine print as opposed to saying, are you fucking kidding me? For 3 weeks, institutions of government failed and nobody could get this done. You're goddamn right we invoked the Emergencies Act. So kiss my ass. There's your answer. That's how I would have done it.
But I don't think the law has a, oh my God, are you kidding me, justification to it. I think it has very specific justifications to it.
I understand that, but there's also, what's the review really about? It's about what the jury of public opinion. Yeah. I think things like Pearson and cost of living, though, were more concerning. Like, because I do think you're going to, and I don't mean to be de minimis about the other, but those things are political controversies. No government is going to avoid those, and you handle some great, some poorly, and whatever have you. But like Dennis, like there's kind of a transactional on the street. Wait a second, are you there for me? Are you getting this thing done? Sort of mentality around Pearson and cost of living. And I just think there's a great. It's not just how are they issue managing it. Like I think there's a great risk in terms of sense of priority attached to these things. So I'll give you an example. We had the Summit of Americas. Prime Minister was, in the United States for 3 days last week, right? And I don't know why. Like I understand America wants to talk about, northern migration from the southern states and so forth, but I don't understand why your 3 days were spent talking about anything other than cost of living. I don't know why you would be on that stage and not begging Canadian media to hear you say, and so I was up the president's ass about supply chains and what we can do to ease that so that might have a moderating effect on the price of oil, on the price of butter, on the price of goddamned anything. Like I just don't, so he's meeting with Gavin Newsom and talking about climate change and those things are all worthy, but for Pete's sake, man, right? People want to talk about cost of living, and we seem like we're talking about anything else. People look at Pearson Airport and say, why can't you unfuck this? And the answer is, well, we're going to establish a couple committees and understand that it's also other people's fault. Yeah, I believe for sure that it's also the fault of the airlines. But like, you don't get the right to make that argument until you play a couple cards and do a couple things yourself. So I just, I think it's a real concern. They better connect to things that people are connected to, or they're going to find themselves in real agenda trouble.
So what are you supposed to do? You guys are both comms advisors. What are you supposed to do when you're the minister and your officials come to you and they say, well, you know, one of the important reasons why things are really slow at the airport is because passengers are not used to the routine after 2 years of COVID, and they're much slower at taking their laptops out of their bag and taking their shoes off. And cumulatively, that's all adding up to a lot of time, and that's a big reason why there's a delay at Pearson Airport. What do you do with that when you're a minister?
Well, if you're smart, you say, "Hey, I'm not going to blame my voters for the problem here. I'm going to get mad at the system, and I'm going to get in there and yell and swear and do what you have to do to sort of get it going again." But the airport thing is, I mean, I've been through Pearson 4 or 5 times in the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's a mess. Like, even the bathrooms are dirty. Like, the whole airport has this, just it's terrible. And I think there's an opportunity, like, as a minister, just get out there sometimes and just show that you're on the people's side. Hey, you're upset about it. I think people understand these are complex issues right now in terms of people being sick and COVID and all that kind of stuff. But, make some progress. And if you'll allow me to just rant here, I mean, we're 20 years later, we're still taking people's bottles of water away. Like, what are we doing? Question everything. Let's get security sort of back working again. But it's the war on tweezers, from 9/11. It's exploded in 2020 and 2022 and fixed the system.
Yeah, I'm with Dennis. Like, you go to Pearson, it's like, even my Wahlberg sucked, and I know that's not Mark and Donnie's fault. Something is fucking wrong at that place. Pearson is not working, but what do you do when officials come in and say that? You say, sorry, unless this explanation comes attached to a solution, I'm not interested in explanations. Because an explanation is of limited value to me. If it provides an insight that I could say, well, and then I can therefore do these 3 things. But like, you talk about a pure comms play, which, by the way, corresponds with substance, it must. But the pure comms play was for the government to get out earlier, before the airport authorities and the airlines, both of whom have acres and acres of responsibility here and are bearing almost no accountability because it's all been shoved to the plate of the federal government, get out earlier with a 5-point plan and say, you know what? Here's a $75 million.
What about a 19-point plan?
8, also very good. Very,
a 19-point plan?
Yeah, 19 point gives you 21 days to work off of, because there's usually a couple of asterisks that allow you to stretch it. But I'd be like, look, we've got a surge hiring fund, $75 million. Airlines, if you're going to hire people, you have to do it for at least 2 years, and you have to do it in the next 3 weeks for us to pay 60% of their salaries, and 4 weeks and we'll pay 50%. So get off your ass and take advantage of it now. I'd be talking about, flowing more funds, doing, not committees, not like wait on this. I would take action immediately and say, yeah, you know what? We're going to ease some of this stuff. The Can Arrive app, I'm sorry, we're going to make some measures on it. Some of the screening processes, we're changing it. Like, just hammer away. And then you have the license to turn around and go, and by the way, Air Canada, don't fucking tell me this is my fault. I've just given you a potential solution. Are you going to take it, or are you going to explain why you don't like the terms?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you think about air travel. People, I think airlines they're complex brands, right? Because people sort of love them, associated with interesting things and travel and fun and all that kind of stuff. But then, people love to hate on an airline, right? Like, it's, my flight was delayed, they lost my baggage, all that kind of stuff. The airlines have managed to take this entire problem, every single ounce of delay, and put it on the federal government. So if we want to talk about comms and issues management, I mean, give Air Canada and WestJet a certificate of the month here, because they have taken every problem with the airport and put it on the Fed's toes, and they haven't been able to kick it off.
Hey, go to the airport authorities and say, give me a freaking break. You can't get to Pearson. So if you're a minimum wage worker, you've got to get to Pearson. Then you got to have lunch at Wahlberg's, which costs $1 million and takes forever. And frankly tastes like shit. And, and. It's an unpleasant destination to work. It's an inconvenient destination. Therefore, it's an expensive destination. So you're going to have to say, sorry, guys, we're actually going to have to boost resources. It can't just be a ping pong game of, well, it's your fault because you're not hiring enough. And, it's your fault because you're not easing guidelines enough.
But the airport's one thing, guys. The airport's one thing. But it impacts directly, to be honest, a limited number of people. It may impact on the government's brand overall in terms of competence and ability, whatever, priority, as you say, Scott. But fundamentally, as big a deal as it seems to globetrotters, for most people, it's an irrelevancy.
Yeah.
Inflation, on the other hand, holy mother of God. Can this government survive another year of 10% inflation without giving relief to people? Because I just did some polling and I was looking at it, and people said people's budgets were so stretched and they were so worried about the inflationary aspects that basically any method I tested, from lowering taxes to free dental care, anything that would get money into people's pockets and help them balance the budget at the end of the month, was welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, David. And you look at, to dispense with the airport and stuff issue. I mean, there's a large, probably a majority of Canadians. I think Abacus had 55% who support keeping the mandates and whatnot at the airport. Most people don't travel on a monthly basis. A lot of people probably haven't left the country to have no plans to do so in a long time. So it's an issue over here on cost of living. I mean, this is, and obviously tied to inflation here. I mean, this is the thing that will defeat the Trudeau government if they don't get a handle on it. And if you're the Conservatives and looking at this leadership race and whatnot, you got to be looking at this saying, wow, we're in a good position. I think this is why the Conservative race has turned so nasty, because
stakes are so high.
The prize feels bigger, right? And these issues are, I'm not a policy person, but these are not easy issues to solve in terms of cost of living. But they're not even showing that they're trying right now. They're sort of lost in a number of these other things, and that would be the first shift I would do if I was in their world.
They are still using childcare as a shield on cost of living, and that will not work.
No, it will not.
No, it impacts such a small number of people. Ultimately, it's important to a group, but it's small.
I think the challenge is even bigger than you guys are saying. As alarming as you guys make it sound, correctly so, I think it is a problem that's even bigger, because we know this problem is going to get worse. Because the macroeconomic remedies to the cost of living crisis are going to make things harder, not easier.
They're chemotherapy, right? It's like having cancer and then you get chemotherapy.
So now interest rates, they may raise, the Fed in the United States may go up 75 basis points, right? And in monetary policy terms, right? That is like driving by your house and throwing a stone through the window. That's a big deal. And people are hurting. There's this survey out today, Manulife saying 1 in 4 Canadians say that they may have to sell their home because the rising cost of mortgage is due to a rising cost of interest rates. And, I think that's probably an exaggerated, uneducated insight, but I think people are just overreacting, but it's going to get worse. And so if you're the government, I don't know why you are not saying now, and I don't care if it's June and it's sunny, I would be establishing the biggest possible platform I could. I'd be saying, we are having a news conference led by the Prime Minister with the Finance Minister, 4 other ministers. We're going to talk about the things we're going to be doing. First of all, I'd start by saying, just so we're crystal clear, right? The price you pay for gas, the price you pay for hamburger, the price you pay for everything is our number one fucking occupation and focus, because it is yours also.
Do you know that hamburger is high in sodium, by the way? And if you don't know that, it's soon going to be on the front of your hamburger package.
Well, see, now that's a big relief. Perhaps instead I will eat topsoil. But yeah. I think that's probably not the right answer, right? Nutritious topsoil, folks. It's still relatively inexpensive. So I just think, but this government has not traditionally said, we want to, really create oomph on economic issues, and we're going to platform them. And part of it is they're getting, I'm sure, Dennis, I'm sure you've been through this, right? I'm sure there's this argument where they're saying, well, hang on, because there's only so much you can do about it. It's a global phenomenon. You got to be very careful about looking like you own too much of it. But that's an issue that is a legitimate debate when you have an issue that's on the margins. This issue is at the center of everyone's life, and it's unavoidable and inescapable, and it will surely be the reason that most people cast their ballot in the next election. And you only have the choice to be on one side of that issue, and that's the right side of it. So you better focus now.
Yeah. And
so the only spending that the government did that could plausibly be linked to inflation is the COVID special measures. I mean, because let's say they were, aside from that, running a $50-60 billion deficit, bigger than it should be, maybe it's not going to cause inflation. The inflationary measures were the COVID special, the CERB, the wage subsidy, all the money that went to the provinces, all that money that went out the door. But we both know that by the time of the next federal election, the context for that spending is so far in the rearview mirror that it will not be an adequate defense to say, well, by God, what if we hadn't? That's gone, right? That's over. You can't use that anymore.
Yeah, that's gone. And I would say, look at 2015 when Trudeau won big. It was on fundamentally an argument that the middle class was not able to get ahead and falling behind. And you're now seeing that on a mass scale across the country. And it's surprising to me that they're not more seized with it for that reason. That was their initial sort of value proposition. And they got to be very careful because it's an easy conservative argument to make on cost of living. And, they've got to really make sure that flank is guarded.
There's a terrible, terrible governmentitis risk here, which your question even gets at, David, because implicit in your question about, well, what's the source of this challenge is this instinct to have an argument about how come it's shitty. Well, nobody's going to have any patience for that. It's not shitty because of this. It's shitty because of something we didn't do that's not our fault. People aren't interested in that. And they're not going to be interested in that when they cast their next ballot. They're going to be, your job as government is to say, we have a plan that makes it less shitty. And our less shitty plan is better than their less shitty plan. Their less shitty plan is shittier than our shitty plan. Like you got to be in that business. You got to be in the business of saying,
but don't you have to fight out whether or not you made it shitty in the first place? Like Poilievre is asserting, and he's got a timeline on his side because in what he said about inflation, he was broadly more correct than the Bank of Canada. Broken clock can be right twice a day, but nonetheless he was. And so, do the Liberals not have to fight the argument that they've created it?
Yeah, I think they have to at least make a try on that. Now you got to be careful. I saw Joe Biden out the other day, and he was talking about, well, there's only so much we can do on gas prices, the war in Ukraine, all that kind of stuff. And
there's no chance that you knew what Joe Biden was talking about after having watched Joe Biden. No, because well, Joe Biden can no longer finish a thought or a sentence.
No. A rambling 5-minute explanation, but that clip out of it, you got to be careful to. I think Scott was sort of alluding to this. You got to be careful to not look like you're sort of pushing it off at somebody else's responsibility. No, I mean, you're the prime minister. You're the fucking government. You got to go and actually deal with this and do something about it. But I do think, David, they've got. I mean, Pierre's winning this thing, right? And so he's going to be holding up his book here, saying, "Here's the things I said." And, the government has to find a way to counter that without looking like they're skirting responsibility for it.
I think there's a big trap there. I think there's a huge trap. I mean, you got to think about what's intuitive to people. And we know, having come through COVID, that people didn't blame Donald Trump. They didn't blame Justin Trudeau. They didn't blame Doug Ford for COVID, right? And so everybody that wanted to argue in opposition to incumbents, well, you're fucking this up. People gave huge things. And I think this is a macroeconomic global phenomenon. Don't tie yourself in knots saying, actually, Pierre Poilievre's argument is incorrect. He makes these following 3 assertions. Here's why each one of those is incorrect. This is what the real source of it is. I think you can blow past this and pivot off very quickly by saying it's a worldwide problem. The question isn't, right, how do we get here? Is how do we get out of here? How do we fix it? And I would move on to that territory really rapidly if I was a government, because for every 10 minutes they spend arguing that Pierre Poilievre is wrong, they're going to sound like they don't get it. They're going to be into the weeds argument about what quantitative easing is and is not, and how actually you're talking about backing bonds as opposed to printing money. And it's bullshit when you say printing money. And where does that get you with the 250 people who can follow that argument? They already have a view. So I just think you got to get on to solutions.
You've all heard me speak here before about how deceptively dangerous railroad tracks can be for anyone but railroaders. They are purpose-built for rolling colossuses weighing thousands of tons, and they are perilous for anything and anybody else. And yet, some people seem drawn to train tracks. It's something our sponsor, CN, spends a great deal of time and effort trying to discourage. Like other big railways, CN has its own dedicated force of police officers, and keeping the tracks clear and safe is part of their job. Reinhold Weisbach is a CN officer stationed in Chilliwack, BC, on the busiest stretch of track in Canada. He patrols, and sometimes he issues tickets, but that isn't always useful. There are homeless people living in the bush near the CN tracks. Some have mental health issues. Others have problems with alcohol. They tend to ignore tickets or run away at the sight of a railway policeman. So nowadays, Constable Weisbach patrols with a mental health nurse. He works with homeless shelters and First Nations elders. He brings along donuts from Timmy's. The nurse offers counseling and help finding shelter, and he explains that the engineer of a train traveling at speed can't just slam on the brakes or steer out of the way. Sometimes, says Constable Weisbach, people tell him they'll just get out of the way when they hear the train. And he tells them that by the time you hear a train, it can be too late. Anyway, CN officers and safety officials are out there every day across the railway's network, training first responders and patrolling and reaching out, the way Constable Weisbach does. And encouragingly, accidents are declining. But they shouldn't happen at all. Nobody beats a train. Please don't try. All right, let's move on to the Conservative leadership race, which is fascinating in its own right. So here's what I saw in the last week since we talked about this, Scott, with Lisa Raitt last week. I've seen Jean Charest out there, questioning the Poilievre membership numbers, cutely calling it Pierre inflation after the just inflation thing. And he's also determinedly talking about the points system. In fact, Joyce Napier couldn't get him off of it on CTV question period yesterday. No matter what she asked, he wanted to explain the points system of the Conservative Party in terms of selecting the leader. And I've seen Brown muse about running for mayor again and state definitively that he won't run if Poilievre wins the leadership, that he won't run as a Conservative candidate if Poilievre wins the leadership. I'm going to say something here, and I'm going to say that before the convention happens, both Brown and Charest will be out of this race. And it's Poilievre's by default.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to imagine. Like, look, I'm sure campaigns, they inflate their numbers or they take a rosy, optimistic view of the world. But if you take a look at, what the Pierre campaign and Jenny and others have put out there as a number, this thing it's over, right? And it's hard to imagine the Pierre voters who are fresh signed up on issues they actually care about, signed up maybe at events. These aren't people that don't know Pierre or don't know much about the Conservative Party. Like, this is a rambunctious group that's excited for their candidate. And I have a hard time finding a path for the others. I don't know. I have no insight on whether they're going to drop out or not. But, I think that it's really, unless something shakes up the race completely, like unless something happens, and we've all been around politics long enough to know sometimes something unexpected can happen. I don't know what that would be, but that's the only reason you hang on at this point, I think, is in the hopes
what would that be? A world war? Like, what would turn a Poilievre member into a Charest member? What could possibly do that?
Yeah, nuclear war. I mean, we're not talking about anything. It
would have to be a scandal about Pierre that forces him to withdraw. Like, I mean, that honestly.
Yeah, but those people would then not vote, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think these are not people who have a long list of a ballot here going in. Like, they're for their guy.
Yeah. And if they don't vote, then the point system becomes instrumental, and that's why I'd like to take 17 minutes and just walk you through how it works in practice. I agree with you completely.
I'd like
I agree with you,
somebody.
David.
Go ahead.
I want to jump on
agree
your
with me.
hot
I love
take.
it.
I want to jump on your hot take because I think I said the same thing with Evan Solomon last week. Like I didn't attach it to Charest, but you're probably right. I definitely think that Brown is preparing the path to bail and run for mayor again. He's not interested in not having a job in politics. Look how
or not having a job, which is the same thing,
or not having. That's right. Well, in his case, absolutely. And, like it just drives me crazy, as Dennis says, like, and Charest goes on, like Charest's this limp argument of, well, actually, we think their memberships are fake. Well, there's no substance behind that. It's not intuitive. It's just the opposite of it. You see these massive crowds.
It's Trumpian. Right?
Yeah.
It can't be true. Who could all those people against me possibly be?
It makes no sense, right? And as Dennis says, actually, right, these are people who've got their hockey equipment on. They're sitting on the bench. They're banging their stick against the boards. They're putting on the foil, and they want to get on the ice, right? And the idea that it's like, well, yeah, but forget about, the gas pay and the point system. No, forget it. It's over. So I agree with you. This thing is over, and all these arguments, they're kind of feeble. And again, it goes back to my number one harping point, which is the Liberals, there's no point in waiting. Like, start contesting this guy, start challenging this guy. Don't fool yourself into thinking that the Conservatives are going to do some of your dirty work for you. Charest isn't landing a glove on this guy.
In the United States, they would call him the presumptive nominee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought he put out a video a couple days ago, and I think, Scott, you were commenting on this online. It was a 2 or 3 minute sort of walk and talk where he was going through the airport, managed to tie it to some big issues. And you look at him as a political talent. And I think there's a collection of Ottawa bubble folks who have an opinion of Pierre that's formed over, almost 20 years of him being elected. But I think a lot of people are going to be meeting him for the first time over the next number of months and years. And he is a message machine. And again, back to the kind of being a discussion on the Ford campaign, being simple, having something you can put on repeat. That's what this guy can do, and he's amongst the best in the business at it. I think he's a real threat, and I'm surprised the Liberals aren't going after him harder now. You can't wait.
There was a thing in that video that showed me that really said, okay, he's really got game, and that's when he walks out of the airport, takes his mask off, and says, "Oh, thank God, I can breathe again now." Because I'm pretty sure that that's what every single person says after they get out of the airport and take their mask off, right?
So. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just agreeing with you again, but as Dennis said, like I tweeted out the video, and I'll tell you, here's my pet peeve of this particular week. I think Pierre Poilievre is concerning. I am 100% opposed to him. I love Jenny, right? But I want to stop that guy. I think he's a locomotive, and we got to get the tracks busted. Okay, I'm all for stopping this guy. But my pet peeve is all these people, and I go look at how much game this guy has. Look at how on bullseye his messaging is. Look at the pure talent of walking through Pearson and doing that in a one tracking shot hit. That is. You look.
I know where you're going, but Liberals hate him too much to understand him, Scott. Liberals are too repulsed by him to understand him or even try.
My pet peeve is I get all this pushback from people saying, "Why are you praising him? You should look at his messages. It's all wrong." And I'm like, people, the first step towards actually confronting this guy and contesting this guy is recognizing the depth of threat and the depth of talent that exists there. Because if you underestimate your opponent, he's going to be reading from your gravestone. And so that's, I'm sick and tired of people sort of being all high-minded and saying, well, why aren't you guys using your platform to denounce him? I'm like, why isn't the federal government using its resources politically to say, let's start now on the job of beating this guy, because it's going to be hard work, not short work.
All right, let's flip all the way across the country to British Columbia, where the BC Liberals, and we may actually enter into a conversation that may marginally be to Charest's benefit here, but it's too little too late. But in any event, the BC Liberal Party passed a motion to start a process for changing their name. Dennis, do you want to walk us through the BC Liberal Party and what this is all about?
Yeah, well, look, being from Vancouver, so there you go, West Coast cred to dig into this here. But it's interesting. I mean, obviously you got BC and Quebec with these liberal parties that aren't really connected to the federal Liberal Party in the same sense. And I think people have who don't dig into history here in BC, that the Liberal Party is a relatively new phenomenon, and for years, Social Credit and the NDP back and forth. And when Social Credit, blew apart, the Liberal Party sort of picked up a lot of that group. And it's probably the one campaign the three of us could all work on would be something out in BC for the current BC Liberals. You get this weird coalition of Conservatives and Liberals together. But I think over time, you sort of watched that blow apart a little bit, and the party is a little more of a traditional Conservative party than I think it's been, and certainly governed a little more to the right, and finding a way to sort of better reflect that. And I do think there's the brand mix up between the federal party and the provincial. There's probably seasons where that's great for you and seasons where that's not great for you, and the party's got an incredible opportunity to craft something new. Like I said, I'd start with some BC patriotism, which they love out there, and go from there and build something that's unique. And they're doing it in an interesting way, like an open book process. It's kind of interesting.
I have despite the loss of the term liberal, I have no issue with them doing it. I think it makes perfect sense from a brand point of view. It's a brand that is a drag, obviously, with some elements of their potential voter base in BC, and it doesn't describe the party properly anyway for people. So I have no trouble doing it. But I really don't think, Dennis, that in the process of doing this, they should become more conservative as a party. Mm-hmm. Because I think that the province has changed a lot since the old SoCred NDP showdown days. Vancouver, the urban area, is a pretty big part of getting elected. And being able to appeal to federal Liberals is a big part of that party's ability to form government. And so they should change the name, but they shouldn't forget the coalition.
No, but I think maybe my point would be there's, I think, some stumbling blocks for Conservatives in the Liberal brand, and finding a way that has something that brings in that keeps that group in. But yeah, they've got to go something. This has got to be it's a big coalition, right? It's everybody from business to social Conservatives to middle class people concerned about cost of living. There's potential for a big coalition there.
Yeah, but I don't think the SoCreds beat the NDP very often anymore.
They wouldn't today. No, you need something bigger. Yeah.
I don't have a ton to add what you guys have talked about. The truth of the matter is I don't feel strongly about what the party calls itself, but I do have two thoughts. One is, if it's fundamentally a coalition party, it should remain a coalition party. And the exercise has to be very careful that it doesn't signal really its fundamental purpose is to no longer be a coalition party. And second, very much related to that, I always worry about not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. I think the intent, and there's a very grave risk that the intent that's signaled in the context of, coincident with the federal Conservative leadership campaign, is the takeaway people will have is it's a purity test. Like Jean Charest got beat up and was told he was a Liberal because he'd been part of a coalition party that was labeled liberal, and therefore we got to get rid of this label. Therefore, we got to get rid of the liberals, and this is all a purity contest. And I just think, I set aside how
I don't think Stephen Harper thought Gordon Campbell was a liberal.
No, and to be blunt, I don't think that Jean Charest is a liberal, but he's just not. And I don't think it was easy for Jean Charest, as he talked about on your pod, to be a conservative in 1984, or his father or grandfather to be a conservative in rural Quebec in way back then. I mean, it was during the Duplessis era, but after that, it was kind of hard to struggle along with that label around you. And so I just think you got to be once people in political parties, brokerage political parties, start saying, you know what, I've actually decided that I'm going to apply a purity test. It's a slippery slope towards something very ugly, and I think quite limiting electorally.
Cool. All right. So we've reached the end of our show. It's time for Gordon Pinsent and the Hey Yous. Do you know what a Hey You is, Dennis? You ready with a Hey You?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay. Scott, you start us off.
Sure. I'm going to go policy wonk. I mean, we've talked about my hey you is every week is, liberals take Pierre Poilievre more seriously and do something about it, but I'll set that aside. The WHO's or WTO rather is meeting, and they're having a discussion at the WTO about what's called a TRIPS waiver, which is basically like, can we relax patent protection for COVID vaccines? And, Canada, we're compromised, and we're compromised because we've had to do a bunch of bilateral deals with a bunch of drug companies in order to get as many doses as we can. And I know that's the job, and I can't be critical of that. But as a consequence, we're one of a many, many, many number of first world nations who are sitting on their hands, feeling conflicted, and not, advocating for a TRIPS waiver. And I just think, when you take a look at the penetration of vaccines in the developing world, you take a look at where it is likely that we could see another variant arise, and the threat that poses, not just to life in the developing world, but life and people everywhere. I just think we should be all supporting this TRIPS waiver, and I hope that something comes out of the WTO this week, but I suspect it will not, and I suspect that our silence will be a contribution to nothing much happening there.
All right. I have to do some research now. Scott sent me away with homework. Dennis?
Yeah, I mean that's I got to do some research there too. But hey, what I'll say so my hey you is to the Federal Conservative Party, and it looks like Pierre Poilievre's winning this thing. Put that aside for a second. The party's bigger than one individual, and I think the Ontario PC Party and the campaign that was run is a prototype for actually winning on the national stage. And what I mean by that is new geographies came available, up north, Windsor area. You had new types of voters, the working class that sort of drove that. And, the party can sometimes become very consumed, a bit of a debating society and ideology and purity tests and all that kind of stuff. Find groups of voters in different parts of the country that actually might be interested in voting for you, that don't turn off your existing voters. And, that's the campaign that, Corey Tonight ran in Ontario, along with, Monte McNaught, Labour Minister, bringing in these working class voters. And I think as cost of living pressures get higher and higher, the opportunities are really tremendous. And it's rare to find a voter group you can bring in without turning somebody else away. And I would hope that they would look at that campaign.
Interesting discussions to be had. My hey you goes out to the Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. Hello? Anybody there? Is this mic working? The whole country is talking about the cost of living. The whole country is talking about inflation. The whole country is talking about what the government's going to do about it. Where's the Minister of Finance? Where is the Minister of Finance? Chrystia, come out and show us some leadership. The country needs some economic leadership right now, some direction. Needs to know that the government has a plan to deal with this. Can't leave it up to Tiff Macklem to sell this message. This is the government's job to win this fight, and it's your job, frankly, to win this fight and solve this political problem for the government. Look forward to it. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dennis, for being here, for sharing your insights from both your experience in Ontario and the rest of the country. And thank you for being such a good friend of the pod. Scott, thanks for rolling through again this week. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. All of you accursed out there for listening. And we'll be back next week with more jibber jabber about politics. See you then.